Okay, so this is the Advisory Committee of Non-Voting Taxpayers. It is Saturday, March 25th, and it's approximately 10:04 in the morning. I'm Peter Halley, the chair. We are meeting under the extended emergency provisions allowing remote meetings in the state of Massachusetts of town committees. And the one thing to keep in mind is this meeting is being recorded visually, and therefore if you have something in the background or whatever, protect it, and whatever you say will be recorded against you, posterity. So be mindful of that. We will proceed as we normally proceed. Just had a call to order. We'll approve the agenda and minutes and then go on to the business. I'll call on people. Raise your hand and I'll recognize you. And we'll go from there. So for some reason I don't recognize you, shout out. And it's I'm not trying to stop people from talking, only sometimes I don't get a full view of everybody who is seeking to speak. So with that said, we have a quorum. Is there a motion to approve the agenda for today?
So moved.
And second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by raising their hand. Unfortunately, I can't get a grid on my thing, so I can't count people without laboriously looking through. But it looks like it's unanimous. Anybody opposed? Okay, so the agenda will proceed. Agenda minutes. The minutes of the last meeting have been circulated. Is there a motion to approve those minutes? Yeah, minutes of our last meeting. Did you just so move, or did you have?
Yes.
Is there a second? I can't see it, but
Gary seconded.
Gary did.
Yeah, so Don seconds it. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And all those, any opposed? I don't hear any nays. So the minutes of the last meeting are approved. We have a quorum. So welcome to new members. We actually have a new member who has been sworn in. And so we want to welcome Pamela, who I guess this week was sworn in. Was there any particular ceremony?
No, it was very uneventful. It was done at the window right before a couple got their marriage license.
Oh, wow. You didn't happen to become part of that couple, you know?
No, I did congratulate them.
Yeah, good. So
I heard there was a parade in Nantucket in honor of that.
yeah.
I must say, I think I just came on late, but I must say, I think the town council's analysis is absolutely correct, or at least it makes a lot of sense. You know, we are, as I heard someone, we have no power. We are an advisory group at best. We can't, our vote carries no weight, and therefore we're not town officials by any sense of the word. Hopefully that'll carry the day. I don't know what that. I don't know what the next step is.
Where did you hear that?
I saw that.
Yeah, you hear that from town council. I've always assumed that what the town is able to do is to have people elected officers or appointed officials.
We're neither.
And the fact that we all are appointed officials, and the fact that we are bound by the town's conflict of interest laws and other of those things we have to abide by, meant that we are appointed officials. So where did you hear that we're not officials?
Well, the town council. Well, go ahead, Peter. I don't even know if you go ahead.
I will find the email.
Yeah,
and we'll circulate it before the next meeting. But as I recall, because we've had a lot of emails this last 2 weeks, Maureen Coleman, I sort of raised the issue indirectly, and Maureen Coleman emailed back saying that I think Libby had heard from town council, who provided the same advice that he gave with respect to the short-term working group, which is that because they have no, they can't sort of act and bind the town to anything, they don't need to be sworn in. And yet,
in person,
exactly. So then I begged the question. Actually, I went further. I said, okay, if that's the case, also, are we bound by the open meeting laws? We plan to abide by the open meeting laws, giving everybody access and all the rest of it. And at this point, I was still concerned that the open meeting law would not be extended. And in any event, the whole matter sort of dropped there. I knew as soon as I asked for anything else that might require going back to town council, that's not a front burner item for them, or at least
so I will say I did have to sign the commitment form, that I was committed to serving the town, yada, yada. I was sworn in, and Maureen did tell me that they are very hopeful that we will be able to continue with Zoom meetings for all town meetings going forward. I think they have felt that it was beneficial.
Yeah.
Well,
Maureen wrote maybe 48 hours ago that the, I don't know what it's called, the bill or whatever it's called now. Anyway, it's on the desk to be signed by the governor.
Okay.
So I guess it's this big budget reconciliation act that the temporary extension of these meetings is buried in someplace, and it's due to be signed. So she was of the opinion that the meetings would continue after this meeting, but we'll hear something before April 1st, presumably, because I think that's when our Cinderella's coach sort of disappears on April 1st. So
Peter, I have a comment. I just received my appointment letter. I first applied in July of last year. So I just received the letter and I signed the letter of commitment, but I won't be approved as a member of the committee until I'm sworn in, and I can't be sworn in until I'm on island. So that will be June 20th. And my term expires 10 days later because I was appointed to a temporary term.
Okay, so Ralph, that is good news, actually, for us. No, good news.
Good news for you, Ralph.
Because I think what will happen, at least the process before has been, your term will be extended, and then you probably have to be sworn in again sometime after your first swearing in. Maybe you can swear twice in one day. I don't know if it's the law.
Their record.
Yeah, and so you'll have a longer term than virtually any of us on this video. I think you and Peter and maybe one other person, because Peter Kahn's term expires this year as well, and he's going to be extended. And I know Bill Sherman's term expires this year, and Bill has decided to retire at this point. Otherwise, he would have been extended. So you have a bright future ahead of you.
It feels like when I visit my oncologist and he says, you really expired, but I'm going to extend you.
Yeah, exactly.
We had so many open positions. They just started filling them, sort of willy-nilly here. So we weren't sure we liked you, Ralph. So we're just making sure.
Am I willy or nilly? That's what I want to know.
Exactly. So anyway, welcome to Pamela, and hopefully we will be doing official welcomings as the year progresses, and we'll be hopefully have the ability to do them online like this. But again, perhaps at some point in the summertime, we'll actually be able to have a face-to-face meeting, which would be nice. And then we'll have to sort of figure whether that meeting ought to be just face-to-face in a room or whether it ought to be hybrid and so on and so forth, depending on what facilities are available at the time.
Donna, have you gotten your paperwork, your appointment?
No, actually, I signed everything and I finished the course way before Ralph. So I may be expired already. I don't know, but I'm coming on June 23rd. So, and that's when I can be sworn in.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I've completed everything.
Yeah, so I think the way it goes is you don't get the paperwork until, and this is what's explained by Maureen, apparently the process is that once you've undergone the interview and all the rest of that, and Libby is comfortable because she is the appointing authority, then her recommendation, because she basically just recommends the appointment to the select board, that has to sit at the select board for 15 days. And then as I understand, the select board votes on it, at which point you hear back from Maureen Coleman saying, you've been approved or appointed or whatever, and come in and be sworn in at your earliest convenience.
I did get that already.
Supposed to work. And it'd be interesting to look back, for example, Ralph, if you want something to send to your family, perhaps you were a topic at the select board meeting, and or it just could be that you were in a bundle of things that were approved in mass. I don't know. But anyway, that's the way it's supposed to go. And little by little, we will fill all these chairs, and anybody who is appointed to a term that expires shortly, that really likely means that you actually have a 3-year plus term because you're going to be appointed twice.
Peter, in our regular schedule, we would be meeting July 1st. If that happens to turn out to be in person, I promise to bring the celebratory donuts.
Oh,
that'd be good. We may have a non-public gathering at some point this summer when most of the people on the island, we've been meaning to do this for a couple of years, but to have people over and cocktails or something like that. Hopefully we can get that done this year if we don't have some, a world war or some new infection that is buffaloing everybody. So anyway, so let's go on, because I have a sort of
salad, and come in any door, okay?
Yeah. Okay. So let's see. So where are we? We have.
Doesn't matter. No. Doesn't matter. I have stuff, so I took a look.
Okay. So we have STR working group meeting discussion. Why don't we bring up some date?
Okay, let me give you a quick report. Hopefully we can keep it brief. The group met on March 14th. It was dealing primarily with representatives from several other communities around the country and learning a little bit about their experiences. The 3 that showed up were Palm Springs, California, Scottsdale, Arizona, and Honolulu, Hawaii, none of which exactly mirror the experiences of Nantucket residents. And in fact, there was a complaint as to why it is that we didn't get anybody from the Cape, because Barnstable and Yarmouth apparently have regulations in place, and we were told that they did reach out to them, but that they did not attend, either to lack of interest or availability. So we have not gotten the benefit of their experiences. In general, I can tell you that in summary, the following came out of this discussion, and a lot of it, if not all of it, is to be expected. In all of these communities, the STRs was an iterative process, just as it is where we are at this point, sort of step by step. And once they got obviously the regulations in place, it has been an iterative process going forward, step at a time, constantly changing, et cetera. And each community has its own needs and its own concerns, and the regulations have to fit those, obviously. One thing that came through fairly clearly, though, on all of them was enforcement. Enforcement seems to have been a priority everywhere and seems to have worked in a general sense. And so hopefully whatever happens here, we'll have some enforcement so it means something. One thing that was very important, I thought, it was sort of, and I hope to use it later on to remind other members of the STR group, because it was just said in passing, but in each of the communities that we discussed, that were present, none of them set different rules for year-round residents versus part-time residents. So it was the same for everybody, and I think that's going to be very helpful to support our position, i.e.
Yep.
ACMVT position. Yes, Gary? I'm sorry. Okay. Interestingly enough, none of the communities had extensive data when setting their initial policies. Of course, we've been trying to get data, which takes me to the next point, which is the town has finally entered into a contract with a data service. As I think we talked about last time around, there was only one entity that bid on the contract. And a subgroup of the STR met on last Friday, I guess it was, not yesterday, the week before, with this fellow who has a place on island. And he seemed, how you judge these things, I'm be interested in hearing what others think. Kathy thinks, and Bill, but he seemed fine. Let's see what he comes up with. We're supposed to, he doesn't know yet. He's just gotten into it, so he doesn't know how it's going to affect our schedule. We're set to meet next Tuesday. I don't think he's going to have anything by then of any substance, but we'll see. But at least somebody now is working on this independent data analysis. Let me just see what else I can tell you. We continue to work on what they call policy levers. Basically, as I said last time, it was a way to fill the time while we waited for the data. But the policy issues that we're going to discuss, I think, in next week are whether or not there should be caps on the total number of STRs that can be had on island at any time, and the total number that any single individual can have. Kathy, what did I miss?
No, that was a great summary. I think I would add is I had the same takeaways that you had, and I also noted things like Scottsdale, Arizona's industry, only 20% of it is related to tourism, so it's very different from that point of view. Some of the other towns were doing regulations because they were trying to protect their hotel industry, which is not something that we need to worry about on Nantucket. Hawaii is very, very different. And they are an island, but they're also, I think most of these communities were year-round tourist areas, whereas we're not. So that's different. And Hawaii has obviously not only hotels, but lots and lots of timeshares, lots and lots of condos. So their model and the way they look is very different. And it's interesting, just as a personal observation, having stayed in an STR last summer in Honolulu, they have what's called a resort area, and that's where all, like Waikiki Beach is a resort area. So you can only have an STR there because they have a specified area, and their neighborhoods are very sacrosanct to them. The native population really does have a very vested interest in having native only, actually, neighborhoods. So that's a really compelling need for them to do that. So, and I think the same thing with the data analyst. I think he's qualified. He does have a bunch of connections to Act Now folks, but he also owns it. His family also has a short-term rental on the island for the past 10 years. So he should know a little bit about how that works. So I think he'll be fine with the data.
It might be, if we have a moment, it might be helpful to have a brief discussion about, I think, about this issue of caps and limits. I mean, for example, obviously Honolulu, they limit, as I recall, they limit their STRs into the hotel area, what they call, I guess, the hotel area, which is where the condos are and whatever, which would make sense. There's talk among the working group. Well, maybe we should have we should have limits within quote unquote residential areas. I must say I'm struggling a bit to sort of try to fine tune the quote unquote neighborhoods of Nantucket. I mean, that's a very, very arbitrary thing. I mean, at best we might be able to, if there was an interest in going this way, deal with by breaking it up into the zoning areas, where they're 1 acre zoning or whatever or less, and making a differentiation there. But I must say my gut is that it's going to create more problems than it's worth to try to come up with quote unquote neighborhood differentials.
Yeah, I think I agree. If you ever look at zoning, zoning has no relationship to neighborhoods. So you'd have to define a whole new way of what street is in what neighborhood. It would take an awfully long time. So I think even if we wanted to do that, it can't be done between now and September. That might be one of those future things if you need it. So for example, my house is on less than 1/4 of an acre in Tom Nevers, and it's in Lug 3. So, it doesn't make any sense. It's not in 3 acres. It's in 3 acre zoning, but it's not 3 acre plot. So I think it'll be really hard to do that. And people will be fighting about which street, which neighborhood am I in,
Yeah. Well, they do that already with some of the zoning where people want to upzone or downzone across the street from a different zone than they're in order to do something. But leaving that aside, during the meeting, did anybody ask the question, or did any of the presenters explain why they thought they had a need to have these regulations? And I'm just, wondering, because I'm still on square one. What is the need?
I think it comes back again on the sort of a general kind of. I think it comes back to noise, the usual noise and use some of the party housing and what have you, and I think also to a certain extent, I think in some of them it was a question of are they competing with the hotel industry in some way. But it was very much specific to the local community.
Yeah. My thought on noise is that's a valid issue if the cost of enforcement is too great. In other words, people don't, the rules and regulations don't make any difference, and people are constantly requiring enforcement, and it just gets beyond the capacity to enforce. And then, it's draconian, and you say, okay, we're just not going to have those kind of rentals in our neighborhoods anymore. But I don't think we're at that point.
But Peter, let me just follow up on that. That's what I was trying to say. That one of the things that did come through loud and clear was enforcement was critical to all of them. And in fact, I can't remember which one was saying, they raised the pricing or the cost of the license to levels such that they could afford to enforce. Which is not a bad idea, except I'm not sure my guess is it will not fly in a town meeting. But if you raise the level of the licensing, and so you can afford to have effective enforcement, a staff of some sort to do this, hopefully that may well take care of the noise issue. If there is one from, of course we haven't, it hasn't, you're right, it hasn't been established that the quote unquote noise that we're concerned about, or the excess traffic, is from STRs. I mean, I think it's
right, and the noise regulation is already in place, but they haven't even figured out how to get the registration going.
Yeah, well, you'd also have to, if you wanted to apply, you want to say, okay, we have a noise problem and they did this because of noise. Wouldn't you need to look at our noise ordinance versus their noise ordinance and compare them, because our noise ordinance is very soft and hard to find any noise under the noise ordinance. I'll be right back. I just have to let my dog in.
So I do agree with Peter that I feel like we're still chasing a tail here in what are they trying to accomplish? Haven't we seen the data that the noise is a non-issue?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked about the data, because Kathy did put in the minutes as requested I guess the Nantucket data VRBO. And I don't know if anybody clicked and took a look at that. We, of course, don't know if that's the definitive data and how accurate it is. And there are some limitations on it, but I took a very quick look. As I understand this set of data, there are about, 18 or 1,900 homes on the island that are out of whatever the universe of homes is that are used for short-term renting. The most, I guess, to me, the most important piece of information there was the number of days per property that they typically were rented out, which, according to the one I have in front of me, in 21, it was 75, 76 days a year. And in 22, it's 78 days a year. Which would indicate if this, assuming this to be accurate information, for the average short-term renter, they're pretty much renting their property out for 2.5 months a year, right? 60, I think about 75 days. Yeah. Which would make sense, because the only time you can really make money doing this is during the 90-day high season.
High season.
Yeah.
And it also begs the question, as far as Article 60 goes, how many of these homeowners can spend 75 days in their home? Probably very, very few of them. And that means that if Article 60 passes, there will be a very steep drop in the number of available homes for tourists, because they won't qualify unless they go to a 30-day or more, 31-day or more rental, which is nobody does that anymore.
It's that obvious. I mean, Kathy, it's kind of like, Kathy and I did not rehearse this, but I brought up the statistic for exactly that point. I think for me, it's another reason that Article 60 should not be passed now, because it's better for the group, the short-term rental working group, to look at all the facts and then make a recommendation, and hopefully they'll be able to do so.
Where did that 75 days come from? Because I don't believe it.
It's 1,300 homes that it came from an independent data aggregator, and VRBO and Airbnb provided their data to this aggregator, who put the data together and got rid of the duplicates for people who advertise on both platforms. It does include, which it shouldn't, I don't believe, hotels and bed and breakfasts that advertise individual rooms on Airbnb. Sometimes they do that, like the Roberts House, the Nantucket Hotel, they all will put individual rooms up on Airbnb, and those shouldn't count. So that's, in my guess, if they take that out, what that would affect is that would make it, the number of average rental stays would probably be lower if you include hotel rooms, and also the number of bedrooms in a house in a rental would be lower because that. So we asked them to take it out, and we haven't gotten it back yet.
You know, I live right in town on Fair Street, and there are, within shouting distance where I live, there are probably a half a dozen or more houses that get rented and get rented actively. And none of those come anywhere near renting for 10 weeks during the season. It's much less. Usually the owner is using it for a couple of weeks, and it goes empty for a week or two here or there. And so I just don't believe, I just think that 75 days number is way too high.
Kathy, do you know if that number includes longer term rentals? So, you know, when we did our registrations with the state, we don't pay taxes on our rentals that are over 31 days.
No, it doesn't include those. It just includes short-term rentals.
Okay.
And just for example, Jean, I rent my house 90 days a year and use it about 90 days a year because I come to the island a lot, but I rent it year round. I rent it in the winter time as well, and the shoulder seasons too. So like, for example, the crew who put the solar up at Bartlett's Farm lived in my house during the winter. And there are work crews that will come and stay there in the winter. So
well, those aren't short-term rentals.
Yes, they are. They're for a week at a time. Yeah. They go home on the weekend. So they're at a week at a time.
So you might rent it to the same people for 10 weeks during the week and not on the weekends. And those would be considered 10 short-term rentals?
Yeah.
That's baloney though. That's not a fair...
You have a Gene,
Peter,
the statistic is not what you're talking about right now. This is number of days per property. So it would be the number of days, not the number of weeks that is this, adds up to this thing. So
my rentals are average 2 to 3 days. That's it.
Peter, I think we could benefit from the knowledge of realtors who are in that business. When I first bought my house 13 years ago, and I've never rented it, so I'm not speaking from that perspective. I was told by the realtor that this house has great rental capacity, and on average, you'd be able to rent out your house 12 to 13 weeks a year, high season, and almost all of those would be a week at a time. And that's a lot of days. That amounts to a little even more than 75 days a year. So I think that's probably the potential. That maybe that's the upside, the top limit though. But I think there's experiential data at least from realtors in the rental business.
Yeah, the real estate agency's NAREB is going to be supplying the work group with its own data. And then the analyst is going to put these two data sets together and take out the duplicates, because there are some homes that are VRBO, they're Airbnb, and they are real estate rented. So they're going to make sure they don't duplicate. So that's the job of the data analyst to get that. And I think the NAREB data is not complete yet. I'm not sure when that's coming in. Do you remember, Peter? Did they say?
No. I mean, it's everything is mañana.
Mañana, yeah.
I'd have more confidence in the NAREB data than in VRBO and Airbnb.
Well, I don't think we need to debate this data. I would just, as I prefaced, we don't know whether this data is accurate or not, but it's the only data we have right now. And if one were to assume that it's in the ballpark, it's quite instructive, I think. And that's the only point I'm going to make with respect to this data. And I thank Kathy for locating it and posting it. And hopefully I guess I just heard the answer to the question about the ask, which the answer was mañana. But when do we expect the data to be aggregated and presentable?
My guess is, but we have a meeting Tuesday. I don't think it's going to be ready then. So possibly, I think the earliest would be mid-April.
Yeah. So here's a question I have to Peter, and I guess Kathy, who's not our representative to Strog, but she is of another group. Have you seen enough to indicate, whether, I guess there are two issues, whether we need short-term rental regulation of some sort. And that could just be politically, could be, the answer is yes, we need it, but practically, no, we don't really. But if one were to regulate, is there, what are the basics of the regulation that would be reasonable and would be acceptable to non-resident taxpayers? And looking at it from the point of view of some percentage of some percentage of our seasonal resident population is probably not very happy with short-term renting, and some of it is very dependent on short-term renting. But if you were in a negotiation, which I think this is kind of part of a giant negotiation, one thing one might do is draw up a term sheet. Forget all the precise language of what a regulation would look like, but what are the principles? What would be on the term sheet that you could start, and then you could say, oh, we can agree to these things, so let's now see how it looks written out as a regulation. And is that a role that we want to play in, or do we need to do this in order to be prepared for that part of this negotiation? I guess the question is, do we need to be proactive now? We've been sort of listening, repelling bad ideas, and being as active as we can, because ultimately we don't have a vote. But do we need to proactively develop something that, if you threw up against the wall, might actually stick and make sense?
Yeah.
Kathy, I think some of the stuff you put together, Ferdinand took it together a while back, like the good neighbor kind of policy thing. Do you remember that? I mean, I felt a little bit like if people are going to short-term rent, they should buy into certain standards. But I just don't see what's going on right now as having any meat in it. Like, okay, there's going to be a registration fee. Whoopee, we already have that with the state. I just don't think that the town has any guidelines, and hopefully that's what's going to come out of the work group is, if we're going to have a regulation, what are we trying to achieve? And I just still keep feeling like we're not getting there. And,
look, I think it's still a little early for us to, I look at this sort of as a horse race, and we're, the Kentucky Derby, and we're laying back here. We got a long way to go still in the race. And we'll make our move once we see the date. Once the data is out, I think it'd be a mistake to begin to really push until we can use the data to be effective. But that said, look, anytime you have a group like this, it's been my experience, I'm sure others, that there's no way they're going to say, well, we just proved ourselves that we really don't. This is a total waste of time. We really don't need our services. So something's going to come out of this, and I think the one thing for sure that's going to come out of it it's going to be something to do with quote unquote corporate ownership. Whether that means, whether you're going to find something to determine what, it's going to have to be an individual. They're going to have something to do with an individual, however you define that. So I think that's coming. Then I think, there may be a push, which there may be a push to try to limit the number of total STR licenses, for lack of a better term, but they're going to grandfather. They're going to definitely, they're going to grant everybody. It's pretty evident that they're not going to take the hard bite, and they're going to let they're going to grandfather everything that's already there. So I think the best we can hopefully do, I think, is to encourage them, since we don't see a big problem here at this point, to take very small steps and see how it works. Whoops, I lost you there. See how see what happens. See what happens. We don't have to go. We don't have to have a huge regulatory process at this point. Take it small steps. Make sure there's enforcement. I mean, if there's going to be any regulation, make sure there's enforcement. But I think we have time. I'd suggest we continue to visit this and maybe begin to build our argument but it's too early to make it, I think.
You know, Peter, when we started this process several years ago, our committee came up with one position, and that's still the only position that we have taken on this issue thus far. And that is that non-voting taxpayers should not be treated differently than everybody else. And I'm thinking now about some of the proposals, including those ones that are up for vote at the current meeting. And I don't think they discriminate between non-voting taxpayers and everybody else. In fact, some of the comments that I see in the newspapers, there are a lot of residents that feel that they're going to lose the opportunity to rent because of the limitations, and their houses aren't even 12-month houses anyway. So I haven't seen yet something that is really focused on our issue, which is let's not allow non-voting taxpayers to be treated any differently than everybody else.
Well, Article 60, I think, comes close to discriminating. Possibly because it does limit. I mean, it does make a difference as to whether you're a year-round resident. It does treat year-round residents different than non-year-round residents.
It does. It isn't focused only on the time you spend there. It's also
there are two sections. I believe there are two.
Gary, let me say something.
Yeah.
I haven't opened my mouth the whole session today, but the reason this committee was formed was because there were two sets of standards. One for the people that were here all year round and one for the non-voting tax people. That's why this committee came into existence. It's done very subtly as to what they do, and that in discriminating against the non-voting taxpayers. But you bet your life it's out there. There's two different sets of rules, one for you and one for them.
But Kathy, you know Article 65, better than intricacies better than I, but I think there's sort of an A and a B, and A is for full-time residents and B is for now.
Yeah, there's an A and a B. There's two things it does. One, it changes the definition of owner occupied that's currently in the zoning that is different than the federal government's definition. It's right now, it says that if you live in your home 3 months a year, it's considered owner occupied. So I would fall into that category because I spend 3 months a year. But they want it, so Article 60 makes that 6 months. Okay, so now you have to live in the house 6 months to qualify as a year-round person for the purposes of zoning, not taxes, but zoning. So that's one thing, it makes it 6 months. So if you live in your home more than 6 months, by right, you can rent whenever you want. There's no restrictions, whatever. If you don't, then you cannot rent any more days than you use your home. So it does discriminate without using the terms, without using the specific terms, but it definitely discriminates more against non-voting taxpayers.
Yes, to be a resident of Nantucket, you have to be there. Obviously, more. You South residency, you have to be there. I guess 181 days, right? So that does make a difference there. For example, Gary, that only applies.
I think actually in the residency, and this for tax purposes, you are a de facto resident in most places if you're there 180, more than half the year.
Right.
And so if one were to, and I have Article 60 in front of me, it never hurts to have actual facts. Right. It's the second paragraph. So first paragraph, in residential districts, of course, all the districts are residential on Nantucket, correct? There may be a couple of, like the airport is probably not a residential district, but short-term rentals are committed on owner-occupied properties. For purpose of this section 139 only, the duration of owner-occupied shall be at least 6 months in each calendar year. So you could have just put resident in place of owner-occupied. Right. One is just a placeholder for the other. And it's only 3 paragraphs here. The second paragraph is also short, but a little bit longer. For non-occupied properties, in non-owner occupied properties in residential districts. So that means non-resident taxpayers. You could just put that for non-residents in place of those words. A short-term rental shall be considered a permitted accessory use provided one, the primary dwelling and secondary dwelling, if applicable, are each used for long-term residential use more than short-term residential use.
Right.
And two, the short-term rental is registered with the town in accordance with general bylaws 1, 2, 3. There's yet another difference in that if you are, by definition, a resident, you don't even have to register your short-term rentals with the town, and so on and so forth. And then the third paragraph is only one sentence long. All other STRs in residential districts are prohibited, period, end of story. I think, Gary, that there's probably a valid issue as to whether or not this is discriminatory, but I think there are very strong arguments that it is discriminatory. And so what have we done? We have our original position, as you outlined, Gary, that is still the bedrock of where we start this discussion. And that is, whatever they do should not be discriminatory. And, quite frankly, we thought that is probably a non-starter. That means short-term renting is probably a non-starter because none of the voters will want to inhibit their own renting of properties. The other two things that we've done as a committee is, one, we supported the registration article. And it's at 1A, we supported the registration article, I guess, last year. B, we supported another article which was tabled that would have permitted short-term rentals. And C, we opposed the Act Now article that would have discriminated quite similarly to Article 60, but in even more draconian terms last year. So we've actually, I would say we've moved beyond the non-discriminatory, because the non-discrimination has been the basis for our positions on those other articles. But we've said a little bit more than just non-discrimination. And lastly, we voted to, and I've relayed the information to the select board in a letter, that Article 60, along with a number of other articles, should not be acted upon because we should allow the short-term rental working group to do its job and make its recommendations for the fall special ATM.
And all three, in the planning committee, the select board, and the other one, they've all it's all the finance committee. Yeah, they've all endorsed that now. So and that's about all we can do. I mean, and there's nothing that we can do to stop the vote per se. But
what about?
Actually, if I may say that one last thing here, I do think, Kathy, and I don't think this is probably, I'll just say this, and then you and I can have sort of an offline discussion further. But I think groups like yours, who have even a more vested interest, so to speak, I think ought to be taking a more active role with regard to opposing Article 60 and making it very clear why, really clear. I know you've had some commentary, but I must say, I don't think it came through as clearly as you might have hoped it would. I think it got a little muddled in the translation with the press. That Act Now has come out very strongly for it. And I think there needs to be more of a campaign against Article 60.
Yeah, we do plan to do that in the next 4 weeks or so and come out and against it. It's a touchy situation being on the working group. We're not supposed to be taking a real position as members. At least we're allowed to take positions, I suppose. We certainly are not going to be attacking Act Now. That's not at all what we're going to be doing, because that would violate our agreement in the short-term rental work group. So yes, we will do that. And just to say, I agree with what you said earlier on what you think the short-term rental group will come out with. I agree it's political and that something has to come out of there, whether the problem is defined or not. because the town, I think, is wanting to vote yes on something. They're tired of the debate. They're tired of this back and forth and vitriol and dissension, I think. So I think the key is what you said, it's incremental. The commercial thing, I think that the Palm Springs idea, which is the true person identity, will be able to deal with commercial. That's what seems to be what people in the public meetings were saying. We don't want off-island commercial entities coming in and flipping houses and doing short-term rentals. So it isn't even dependent on whether there are a lot of them now. People don't want any more of them. So I think it makes sense to say, no, we don't want any more of them either. And here's how you stop them. But we also, need to have some kind of an idea from the town is, okay, do you want to cut down your visitors by X%? If you want to, then this is how you do it. You cap your STRs or whatever, if that's really what the town wants, because that's what will happen with any kind of regulation. You'll have less tourists. And if that's what the goal is, fine. But if that's not your goal, then you really can't mess with it much. That's really the answer. So I think we'll also, the other thing you didn't mention is we absolutely have to have the zoning that says STRs are legal, because these lawsuits are ridiculous at this point and very expensive to the families who are happen to live next door to a disgruntled neighbor who's being funded to sue them. That needs to stop. So I think the short-term rental group has to come out with that zoning, like equivalent of 42 last year, and this year 58, 59, and 61 do the same thing. So that's what I think that the group needs to say. Thanks.
So two other points, and then I think unless somebody else says something, we can draw this.
Well, Scott and Jean both had their hands up. You may not have seen.
Sorry. Thank you. So Scott, why don't you?
Yeah, I just wanted to note that, there's a fair amount of word soup going on here in owner-occupied residential use, which left undefined is going to cause a lot of problems. Either you default to tax definitions here, which has got its own set of issues, or you get precise, owner-occupied, let's take that, you can either say you must physically be present there, in which case everybody on the island is probably going to want to start wearing these trackers, because you can be a full-time resident and easily miss the 6 months. Or it can mean that it's held for your exclusive use. You have a house that's empty in December, but it is only available to you. Tax world would take the point of view that, you're occupying that. But this sort of heads heavily into the question of whether it is discriminatory towards non-full-time residents. But I just argue that when we get there, and I agree that this is a little bit of a horse race in terms of how we weigh in, but you can't leave imprecision on the table at the end of the day here.
I totally agree. I'm glad you brought that issue up, because it's been something in the back of my mind as to what does owner occupied mean. I'm not right now. I have guys working in my house virtually every day of the off season. Am I occupying it, or is the fact that I chosen not to have somebody else in it?
Maybe it means, Peter, that when you rent it, you have to also be staying there with the people that you're renting to. I mean, it's ridiculous.
So that imprecision has been driving me kind of nuts, and I'm glad you brought it up, Scott. So, Gene, I think you had.
There was only one thing. If you, the way they're defining residency, if you're a resident for 6 months and a day, then by definition, you can only be a short-term renter for less than you're using it. So that the distinction between short-term rent, somebody who is using it three weeks and renting it less than 3 weeks, and somebody who is a year round of 6 months and a day, the need for a distinction goes away, because by definition, if you're a year rounder, meaning 6 months in a day, you cannot rent it for more than you use it. And that's what they're saying for non-resident
No, but Gene, I think here, if I understand, here's the issue. If you're a quote unquote resident, and so you're there for 180 days, you can therefore rent arguably 179 days out. But if I'm a quote unquote non-resident, I'm only there for 4 months, right? I'm limited. I can't rent it out for 169 days. I can only rent it out for 159 days. In other words,
you can only rent it out for 1 day less than
then I'm there. And that's where the discrimination is. That's where the discrimination
Well, it's not a discrimination because in either case, you can only rent it out for 1 day less than you're using it.
Well, but you know.
What about, Kathy, what about all the local residents, many of whom own several rental properties other than their own home? Are they going to vote in favor of 60? Because they have their own home. And I remember, and some of the people who belong to your other organization, many of them say, I can only afford the house that I have, that I live in, because I have a separate house next door that I get rental income from. Now, how about all the local residents that rent out 2 and 3 or 4 extra properties that is not their own home? Are they going to vote against Emily Kivert's article or not?
I would guess they would. There aren't all that many, but they definitely would be affected.
Yeah,
you don't think there are a lot? I think there are a ton of locals that have a lot of rental properties other than their own home, a ton of them.
Well, Copley has come out against it.
Copley has come out against
it, hiding behind this organizational name that, you know, that whatever did that study, you know, I don't recognize the name that they did the study, but they're behind that. And they're opposed to Article 16.
Also start with the realtors. The realtors own a lot of the houses that are rented out.
Right.
I'd just like to say, Kathy, to your point also, I mean, we're spending an awful lot of time on this, and it mirrors what's going on in the community at large. And I hope that we do come to some resolution in the near future, because it's not good for Nantucket to have all this divisiveness going on. So I'm glad if you think that the town is actually also hoping that we can come to some kind of an agreement or resolution. It's better for the community.
So
I talked to a lot of people when I was on island in the wintertime, and you know, people are more accessible. They come out of the woodwork. And I think that that's pretty much the same thing. They're like, we don't want to damage our seasonal residents. We don't want to hurt them. That's not what we're trying to do. But, you know, and then you say, but that is what you are doing if you support this. And they're like, yeah, so they get it. Some people, if you think it through, you get it. But so I don't think there's any vitriol, but it's just the newspapers keep flaming the fires and everybody, you know, it's just, but I think people are tired of it. They just want, let's put something in place and let's move on. So that's what I was hearing.
So before we move on, just 2 other little semi-factual points. Again, going to this VRBO data, which we don't know if it's accurate or not, but the other data point that I saw in there that was of interest to me was the amount of revenue generated by these rentals. And for 2022, it was $115 million and $94 million in 2021. Those are big nuts. And if you were to enact regulations that dramatically take down that amount, first of all, you'd have less base to tax on, and so on and so forth. In other words, there are really big impacts that one could discuss and take into account when looking at this this potential regulation. Which brings me to the next question, which is, was it Worcester, WPI, or somebody was doing an economic study? Who is doing this economic study? And when is that supposed to land?
That's out. That's UMass,
Right.
UMass Amherst, and it's the Donahue Institute.
Mm-hmm.
So the group that Peter mentioned, so it's Copley is the main funding behind it, but it's called the Alliance for the Protection of Nantucket's Economy or something like that.
You see the ads, Peter. The ads are out. The ads are out now.
Right. So they're putting ads out. And so we've actually been questioning the numbers that are coming out of there, and this goes back to the ambiguity of the definition. So all Copley did was hand over, here's Article 60. How's that going to impact Nantucket? And just that's what they told us they did. And they didn't give them any assumptions. They said, here it is, tell us the answer or how it's going to, because what they did before was, what does Article 90 do to Nantucket? Now it's what is Article 60. So interestingly, they came back and said there's only 114 properties on the island that would be resident-owned STRs that would not be under Article 60. I don't believe that number, but that's what they came back with. And they also, after asking questions about what they did, it was very interesting that 8% of the lodging on the island is traditional lodging, hotels, and bed and breakfasts. So 92% are STRs, which is nothing like any of the other towns. But what they assumed when they read Article 60, just to go back to what we need to define things, was they view the definition of long-term residential use as long-term residential rentals. So they assumed that that you had to rent it long-term if you were not owner occupied. So that second paragraph there, because it's not defined, they interpreted it as you would have to do long-term rentals longer than you did short-term rentals, which is not how I read it, but maybe that's the way, so that's the whole point. Is I said, I don't think that's the right interpretation, but then again, we don't have a definition. So.
Well, we do, actually, what Scott and you have said, it made me look a bit closer at Article 60. And I notice again, you have these two paragraphs. One is for owner occupied and the other is for non-owner occupied. And only the non-owner occupied include these issues, the terms, the short-term and long-term rental, because that's what it says. Because it does say long-term rental use more than short-term rental. So I guess your point is long-term residential use is not necessarily just a rental. It can be more robust than that. But you have all these complications that clearly show a different treatment of owner-occupied, or rather resident and non-residential property.
Right.
Goes back to Gary's point in the first.
So Article 60 clearly means no more commercial because no one ever lives in that house.
Yeah. So
one last point.
Could Kathy, could you just send out, or anybody send out a link to where one could look at this report?
They haven't published it. That's the question. So what the Alliance is doing is they're putting ads out and they're putting stuff on their website, but they haven't published the actual report yet. So I don't have a link to it. Okay.
Just a link to the Alliance's website then would be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
One last point. I think, we're talking about, what is it we can do? What is, I think we also should be pushing the town, or at least, quietly, until the town, and I think Kathy mentioned this, until the town sort of takes a position on how much, what the income issue is going to be for them. In other words, how much do they want to cut back, or are they prepared to cut back on tourism? This is, we're sort of swinging in the, swinging in the dark, because even this committee does not have the financial data, which is going to be critical to have, as to what the effect will be. What is the effect going to be if you cut back or limit in any way the STRs on the viability, the financial viability of the town? That's, to me, is a very important factor here, and we haven't gotten any of that yet.
Peter, just thinking about what you said, that would be a fabulous point to make to the general public on the island of Nantucket, because when they start thinking about, okay, how much is the town willing to cut back on tourism revenue, all the local businesses will suddenly say, holy smoly,
yeah,
I never realized that's what they're talking about, you know? If we could get that as a major subject, somebody ought to bring that, write a letter to the Daily Current or something like that and say, why doesn't the town tell us how much they're willing to cut back on tourist revenue? Because obviously that will result from the implementation of some of these regulations limiting short-term rentals. So the town should talk about how much they're willing to reduce the tourist revenue, and that'll scare the hell out of half the merchants on the island.
Right. I think again, timing may be important here. I think once, when we get the quote unquote data, and it will not show that, that's the time to say, hey, that's the, very data we need, we don't have.
But also the town, those numbers you mentioned before about the revenue that comes in from short-term rentals, that equates to what, $6.5 to $7 million that the town is now getting in tax revenue through the state program. And when we looked at that a few years ago, the Board of Selectmen was reluctant to assign any of that money to affordable housing. They thought they could fund that differently, and they had already allocated that tax revenue to other town needs. So the town is directly going to be impacted by any reduction in rentals through that tax base that comes in. They take 6% of all that revenue.
So that all raises the issue because you have this alliance, which is I'll just call it the Copley Alliance right now, that's taking an advocacy position. We have the real estate agents, big, commercial group that I'm going to guess they're against all this stuff. And what about, there must be a Downtown Merchants Association. What are they doing? The Airport Association, what is it doing? Because all of these entities are looking to have their patronage cut back if something like Article 60 passes. In other words, I'm just saying that we have just so much clout. We've done what we can do. We're participating in the process. There are these others who are even more directly involved than we are. And I think we're pretty directly involved because we have lots of non-resident taxpayers that are going to be dramatically poorly affected by Article 60. Peter, yeah.
Ralph has his hand up.
I'd just like to comment on our process as a committee. I like Peter Kahn's idea that we should wait until we have adequate data, a couple of kinds of data. And I like Peter Halley's idea that once we have data, we as a committee should be proactive, whether you call it writing up a term sheet or, asking for a vote of an opinion. We should become pretty proactive. Why? Because this issue is in the best interests of our constituency, the non-voting taxpayers. They would wish not to be discriminated against, in Gary's words. So in process, we've got a little time, but then we need to be proactive.
Great.
So that brings us, just before we said that, the proactivity takes two, there are two time dimensions. We have one, the May annual meeting, and we have the other, November, October special annual meeting. And of course, the May annual meeting can trump, in some ways, the November annual meeting if Article 60 were to pass. One of the issues will be whether or not we ask to appear at the May annual meeting. And I'll just tell you right now that my personal schedule does not have me in the United States at that time. And so we will need somebody from the group, if we decide this is a step that we want to take, who feels comfortable advocating a position, which I think we've pretty well spelled out already, and whether it's worthwhile us advocating a position at that meeting, having previously taken the position. I think I've communicated to FinCom and to the Select Board, but not to the Planning Board. But the Planning Board doesn't need any further communication on this issue anyway, because we're all apparently in the same sheet of music. But just keep that in mind. Nothing we need to do today, but we certainly will need one more meeting of our group prior to the annual town meeting to decide what, if anything, we're going to do at the annual town meeting on this or any other issue.
Donna has something her hand up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a question more regarding like an organizational chart. Since we talk about representing our constituency, how do they contact us? Can they contact us? Can we have some sort of feed into our committee so we can say X number of non-voting Nantucketers agree with this, disagree with that, so forth? Do they have a voice, or do we just speak as an isolated group?
Okay, so I've written extensively on this subject. First of all, I don't agree with the notion that we have a constituency. Our constituency is actually the select board. We're appointed by the select board to provide advice. And that advice is in the bylaw, advice of matters of interest to non-resident taxpayers. So our job is to do the best we can do under the circumstances to give the best advice we can to the select board on matters of interest. I tend to think that we do that by holding these public meetings. They're, publicly noticed. When we get somebody participating or with an issue that they want to raise, we let them raise it. And we take that all into account. We don't agree with everybody who comes to us. And in some instances, we've disagreed with them. But I think that the best we can do, because we have not in the past sought to get money to survey people or anything else, is to actually do what we did this year, which is to fill all the darn seats that we have on this committee in order to get the broadest possible participation in a practical manner. 15 people, I think, collectively are better than 8 or 9 people. And hopefully we're getting some diversity in terms of the opinions and experiences people have that they can bring to the committee as non-residents.
Peter and Donna, I misspoke when I said constituency. I did not mean that we should see ourselves as representatives. I think of us more as senatorial, bringing whatever wisdom we have on a subject.
Well, I agree that I save all my wisdom for every other Saturday morning. Which my family can tell you there's not a lot of, that what we've done, Donna, is Matt, we've heard whatever we can hear. We've had a real tough time encouraging people to attend these meetings. I don't think there's a single person who's not a member of this committee or about to be a sworn-in member of this committee on this video or on most of the ones that we've had. But every once in a while we do get outside folks. Also, for people who've written in, I've reminded them, and I remind everyone here that each one of us has a voice. The one thing we can't do is speak on behalf of the committee without the committee's approval, but we can speak individually, certainly, to attend town meetings, well, not town meetings, but to attend select board meetings, to attend the meetings of these other committees and tell them what we think. And if, by the way, what we think includes some established policy of this committee, we can mention that. And we have very few established policies, but on this particular matter, we have, I think, voted at least 3 times on various aspects, which I will call our committee's policy so far. So I think it's a matter of, and you can, talk to other people about advocating too, because almost every one of these meetings, except the town meeting, is open to participation by anybody, whether they are residents or not residents. I think somebody did mention, I think it was Lou who mentioned there are two rules, one's for residents, one's for non-residents. I've gone to some of these committees and there clearly are two rules. The first thing they ask you is, how long have you been around? And then, treat you like a child because you don't have the depth of experience and commitment that they do. But it certainly doesn't stop one from making reasoned pitches to whomever. So Donna, I think that it's almost like, thank each one of us for doing what we're doing. And maybe there's a little bit more we could be doing to, depending on your interests, to speak up. And hopefully other people will think what we're speaking about is worthy of consideration.
Plus, your letter, Peter, your letter appeared in the Inky a couple of weeks ago, as mine did 2 years ago, where we basically let people know they have issues, they should talk to our committee.
Yeah, and also we had a non-resident taxpayer wrote to the committee, to Kathy as the secretary, and Kathy passed along the letter to me. I think her name is Annie Elliott out in San Francisco, who has a short-term rental property that she's had, I think, since the 1970s here, and is very worried about the subject. And I passed that letter along to the select board with a cover letter to, I guess, the select board and the FinCom, the subject matter of which was, let's wait for this short-term rental committee to speak before acting on these various related pieces of legislation. But her letter, made the economic argument toward the end of her letter, and that's why I passed it along and made it in very simple fashion. It's kind of like, if you like going to all these wonderful attractions that we have downtown, i.e. restaurants and whatever, don't think they're going to be around if all of a sudden they're, half your short-term rentals disappear, because there's not going to be a market that will support them all. And I thought it was simple and direct and quite eloquent. So the answer is we're not doing, we use our collective wisdom as best we can to make recommendations that we think probably are representative of the interest of our fellow non-resident taxpayers.
And I would think also, we are operating under a form of government that is not a representative form of government. Town meeting form of government is not representative. The only thing you can do is show up at the meeting, whatever committee you care about or whatever issue you care about, you have to show up at that meeting and voice your concerns or your support. And the same is true for us. So I think that's the answer. If people want to get their voices heard, they Zoom in and share them with us or send a letter.
Yeah, but part of it is
I'm sorry.
I think Peter, I'm sorry, Donna. Peter, you can speak about what you were just speaking about, but I believe the fact would be that if we were able to, we're looked at as representing the non-voting taxpayers, and yet there's only 9, now there's 15 of us. And I think when you go and the town meeting or wherever it might be, and you say, well, I'm representing these 15 people, that's pretty weak compared to if we could somehow have gotten input from a much broader group of the thousands of non-voting taxpayers and say that this is based on not only our 15 thoughts, but also a much broader population. And so I think we shouldn't downplay at all what Donna was suggesting, which I believe you unintentionally were, And we should try to figure out a way that we could get a broader population, either through some sort of survey mechanism or some other way. And if that involves going to the selectmen and saying, we need $5,000 to do this kind of survey, can you provide it? I don't think that hurts. And I don't think doing that kind of survey hurts at all. In fact, I think it's a very positive way of our being viewed more positively by the community as a whole.
I had suggested to Kathy that perhaps to the letter that you did, Peter Hale, that every now and then we write to the Inky and remind them we exist. And I guess since you said we're more senatorial, I don't know where we go from there, but I think a lot of people don't realize we exist, number one. Number two, more people who know about it, the more we can be of service to our group, even if maybe we're not supposed to be.
If we use the local area associations and get them somehow involved, offering them an opportunity to put a member on our board, that's how we're going to be able to get more broad support. We've never done that, talked about that for a while, but I think that that's where we would start. That would give us a right to say that we're representing a lot more than just those of us on this committee.
When Libby Gibson came out this summer to speak to the Sconset Civic Association, that is when she kind of made it known that there was not a Sconset voice on this committee, and a number of us chimed in that we'd be interested. So I think in a way she was saying you have some representation through this committee. And your civic association can chime in.
And I'm sure if we had enough people that haven't had an interest, if we asked the town to expand this board, they would do that for us. But I think that's the avenue that we have to use in light of the fact that they're not going to give us any money. They don't even give us literature for writing a letter. So I think you're not going to get any dollars from the town, but get the local folks involved through their civic associations, through the local groups, and that's how we'll expand this board and get our voice heard better than it's being heard today.
There are two things. Newspaper is the way to go first, because it doesn't cost anything, and it makes, number one, the first thing is it makes our group aware that we exist. And then we can go from there if that's possible, according to our government.
Two things. We all have neighbors, so we could say we're not just 15 people. We talk to 6 or 10 of our neighbors, so we're over 100 people. And the other things, there are surveys, free surveys like SurveyMonkey, which doesn't cost anything to do. If the town could, in fact, just give us a little bit of IT help in setting up one of those surveys, we would be able to send that. I mean, we'd have to build a mailing list, but we could.
The town does not have emails, though. They don't have anybody's email. They only have mailing addresses. So we would have to do letter stuffing and mailings to non-voting taxpayers. So it's a fairly significant effort because they don't have emails. They only have...
but we could say go to SurveyMonkey, and we could do that in the Inky, in the Current, in Daybreak, and we would start. We would start.
Okay. You have to start somewhere.
Let me just, as the chair, I'm going to put this all. We can close this up because we have a couple of things to get through before we can leave. I think this is matters for future discussion on surveys. The surveys are only as good as the survey instrument, and it's all. I've litigated these things, and I think that we ought to do a good job with what we have right now and then plan for the future. We'll have Libby on early in the summer, and maybe we come up with a package of recommendations, which we get her to address, before she comes to us. But I hate to, I think we're all talking about expanding things. The average summer resident is just coming here to enjoy themselves for a week, the summer or whatever. and they have no interest. And probably the majority of them think that they've been coming here to Nantucket for a long time. It's been pretty good for a long time. And so whoever's running the place is doing a pretty decent job. I happen to think that. I think the average person who comes to Nantucket is not looking to confront a bunch of issues other than whether it's rainy or sunny that particular day, and maybe how hard it is to get to the supermarket. But that's my own view. So let's move on to the next subject, unless I'm really cutting somebody off who's dying to say something more on this. And I can't see the whole group, but
move on. That's good.
Yeah. So the next group is a decision on outdoor lighting bylaw. This has become my favorite whipping boy, and we just need to dispose of it now. The way this ended, I think we've tabled this twice, and I made some statements last time about the coverage of the article, and I went back and looked, and the coverage was as broad as I thought, overly broad. Includes it turns out if you have a fire pit in your backyard, that's a outdoor lighting source, and it's included in all of this. It turns out that when they look at all the total lumens on your property, including those lumens that are shielded and pointed down, they're all counted in terms of the glare from your property, I guess, even though they're pointed down, not pointed at anybody, not pointed at the sky, and so on. I pointed a couple of, we've had one back and forth with the proponent of this, and she's basically, acknowledged that this very, very broad reading that I have is an accurate reading. And with respect to any ambiguities in there, quote unquote, there are things that could be solved in the future. My background is you kind of fix it first instead of passing laws that have problems with them. And so I think we could do one of two things. We could just vote not to do anything here, or vote to oppose. At this point, I think both the select board and the FinCom have, at least the FinCom has voted to, it's okay so long as you take the enforcement out. I frankly don't know what the best move is, and some people may think that this ought to be passed. So open up for any discussion and any, well, I guess, is there a motion to do something here?
And I just think that we've talked about this. We've spent 3 hours of prior meetings talking about this, and the conclusion I've come to, notwithstanding my own personal views, is that we don't really have a consensus in our group. Therefore, I think that unless we have a strong consensus that we want to take a position on something, I think we should just pass. The town didn't take any position. If you looked at the new warrant that they just produced yesterday, there's no position taken by the town, either the finance committee, the select board, or anybody. So I think we should take no position on it. We don't have a consensus of our group. Some people here think it's a great idea. Some of us think it's a horrible idea. If we don't have a strong consensus, I think we should just move on, not take a position at all.
The town did, the FinCom did approve it with the enforcement out of it, and the select board.
It did not. It's not in the warrant. Kathy, if you look at the warrant, there are no.
I did.
Yeah, there's nothing.
I did. The new one I looked at, and I listened to the select board meeting. So whether it is or it isn't, that
it is not.
I'm pretty sure, because I read it and it said the FinCom approved it, and I confirmed that. But so whether it is or it isn't, it's also been endorsed by, I think, 8 different neighborhood associations and the Civic League and a whole bunch of other organizations. So it's got a lot of support in the town. I'm not saying we should take a position on it, but it does have a lot of support for some reason. I'm very surprised at some of the groups that never take a position, like the Civic League took a position on it.
Yeah, I think it's probably it's because nobody's actually read the damn thing. They're just thinking about dark skies. So it's a very dark position that they're taking.
Some light on it.
Yeah, yeah. It's a really, well, I've already said what I've said. So there's no motion to approve.
Scott, can you see Scott's got his hand up there, Peter?
Yeah, Scott.
You're on mute, Scott.
Yep, I got it. I was just going to note, you know, if I have the right version that came back with the red line, yes, the permit process is out of it, but there's still a fine structure of $100, $200, and $300 per luminaire in violation. Which while they're, and there's also still the ability for the lighting officer to, with a warrant, be in your rose bushes with a light meter, checking out what's going on. So, that maybe no direct enforcement, but certainly the ability to do things. That, my view, overbroad, not particularly fit for the for purpose in terms of what the problems are. 40,000 lumens for non-residential use. Somebody better tell Stop and Shop they got to get turn stuff out. I could live with no position, but I think it's a feel good for a lot of other people without a lot of careful thought.
Yeah. So, is there a motion to complain, to approve, or to do nothing? Maybe we ought to.
Motion, we table it.
Okay. Is there a second?
Gary?
Gary, second. Any further discussion? So all those in favor of tabling it, which I guess just means pass it by. Gary, you have your hand up. Oh, you're voting in favor.
Yes.
Go aye. I'll go with that too. And so I can't actually, let me just see if I can figure out. Can somebody count these votes? There we go. So all in favor of table aye. So we 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'll let everybody vote. Can everybody vote who's been approved, whether it's sworn or not? Is that okay?
Yes,
the sense of this group. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and all those opposed? Is none. And is anybody?
Let's move on, Peter.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Now
3 hours enough. 3 hours is enough.
So tabling it means I guess anybody can bring it up in the future if they want to. But we're finished for today. So then we go to Article 40, which is the bylaw proposed for closing the loophole on fractional ownership. Does anybody support? Where to go with this one?
If that's the town motion, I think we should approve it.
Okay, so motion to approve, is that a motion?
Yep.
Second? Second, yeah, second. Any further discussion? All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All those opposed? No opposition? Any abstentions? No. Okay, good.
Who seconded it? I didn't get that.
Lou did.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
that brings us down to the end of our meeting, I guess. At some point, we're going to need to get into more regular meetings where we're not looking at these warrant articles, but what we've done in the past, for those who've not been on the committee, we usually start the year out with a sort of state of the island address by Libby, and then we typically have people from the various departments. This year they've got finally, I think a traffic planner or a transportation planner who we're going to want to hear from again once he's got his feet back on the island. And just think about other issues you want to hear about at the meeting. They're very informative and sort of keep us up to what is going on. Gary is our representative on the Coastal Resiliency Committee, and at some point, I guess we'll have more information from them as to what's going on. We have, the possible redevelopment of the harbor area that has been percolating for the last 10 years. And I don't know whether, but we get a lot of information to think about. And then I guess just think about what are the issues that are of concern to the people in our neighborhoods that need some addressing.
Can we also, Peter, make an effort to at least push the town? I mean, assuming that the Zoom stuff is continued, that there is a facility that we could we could meet during the summer. I mean, I must say to you this, having been on this board now for quite some time, there's a real difference, with all due respect to everyone, there's a real difference between doing this in person and doing it on screen. It's just not the same. They had said at one point that the trailer, as ugly a building as it is, at least on the interior, supposedly it was equipped with the ability to have hybrid meetings. I think we should look into that. I think we should, definitely look into that in the summer, because in fact we meet less in the, this year we've met, because of Straw, we've met, every other week, which is incredible. Usually in the summer, it's maybe once every 2 to 3 weeks. But I think it's important to try to see if we can do this in person, or hybrid, I should say.
So I will write on behalf of all of you to Libby in the next week or two, asking that question, I guess, with a copy to Maureen, whoever would be the person that we really need on board, because it seems to be the issue, Peter, is does the town, let's find out if this bill passes. The assumption number one is the bill passes to provide.
The governor's going to sign it, though. She's going to sign it.
Yeah, and if that is signed, then does the town really need to invest a little bit in hybrid meeting rooms, or does it have the facilities that are available that are needed? I had the feeling that one of the reasons the town really wanted the remote thing to pass is because they really don't have the facilities to, even without hybrid meetings, to have everybody meet on a regular basis anymore. So yeah.
I think the Athenaeum has meeting space. I don't know if it's legal for us to meet there, but that might be a possible location.
Yeah, I think we have two issues. One is available meeting space, and two, ideally that meeting space should have hybrid facilities, because I don't know, I'm kind of in and out all summer long, and it's been a real convenience for me to be able to be available any place I am on a Saturday morning, and not have to actually plan absolutely to be on Nantucket every Saturday that we meet. But that's my own personal convenience.
I believe the Athenaeum has cameras and that kind of meeting room.
Right.
Yeah.
The key for the town is that if we use their facilities and Saturday mornings, there won't be a conflict. The conflict is during the week, is they do have to provide a technician to run the hybrid meeting. So the town would have to provide a support person for us. They may or may not.
That will really test how much they want our advice,
Yes.
Exactly. All right, maybe that, with one meeting or two, some one of us could be, adept enough to push switches. But I'll draft something up that just raises the issue and see what the response is.
Great, thank you.
Okay. And is there a motion to adjourn?
Do we have a next meeting?
Oh, we have the next meeting. So I guess when is the next Strog meeting?
This Tuesday.
Tuesday.
And the one after that is on the 11th.
Hold on, let me get my.
The 11th, which is Monday after Easter. Easter is the 9th.
Yes.
I would prefer not to meet on the 8th.
Second, that only leaves the 2nd, or whatever, the 1st. I guess that means the 1st, which is next week already.
It'd be appropriate day.
April Fool's Day. Yeah.
April Fool's Day.
Yeah.
I can't do that.
I guess the question is, do we really need a meeting? Is there anything you anticipate?
Yeah, my sense is, I don't think, even if we're not going to get any data until the meeting of the 11th, is realistically. I think if that's the case, then we really don't need to meet until after that. So maybe the weekend
15th?
April 15th.
Tax day?
Yeah.
It's not tax day this year, Kathy.
That's
Tax
true.
day
It's
is
Saturday. Yeah.
Yeah.
We get the weekend. Yeah, the 15th would be good, I guess.
Okay.
And that's before town meeting, so that gives us time to answer, is anybody going to go?
Yeah. Good. So if anybody is planning on being at the town meeting, or being in Nantucket on the day of the town meeting, and would welcome the opportunity to attend and perhaps speak, just let me and Kathy and Peter know. So we'll know what our options are for that day. Okay, and I guess in general, the one thing I would think that we might speak about is putting things off until on short-term rentals and what have you until the fall. I can't think of anything else that we really need to address at that meeting, if indeed we need to address that. Okay.
Peter, I don't know if you noticed that the issue that we voted not to support was Bruce Mandel's modification of who's required to ride, on the side path, stuff like that. I noticed that the Finance Committee has voted to not approve it. Not that it matters. Bruce is going to push it anyway, and who knows what will happen at the annual meeting. But I just was noticing, looking at the warrant, that the Finance Committee decided not to recommend that.
Okay, so that'd be another issue that we might. We actually decided not to recommend it as well.
Right.
Yeah.
We decided, not to.
Yeah. So that it could be a twofer for whoever goes, if indeed somebody's willing to do that. So we'll keep that in mind. Great. Is there a motion to adjourn until the 15th? And a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay.
Good.
See you on the
15th.
15th. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.